Chapter 6. Little Eddie's Birthdays. The eastern box turtle is one of God's most wonderful creatures. It carries its house around on its back everywhere it goes. But what a house! Box turtle shells are works of art with red, yellow, and orange geometric patterns. Their stubby legs are covered with scales that match the color of their shells. You can tell the males by their bright red or orange eyes. The females have brown eyes. Well, little Eddie loved box turtles, so for his 6th birthday, he asked to go on a box turtle safari. The family loaded up in their station wagon and, with a basket of sandwiches, headed for the back roads of the county. Appalachia in the springtime is a magical place, with fiddleheads of ferns opening and the white surprise of bloodroot flower bursting through the carpet of last year's leaves. The flowers of the sarvice tree had come and gone, and now trilliums were lining the folds of the hollows. The spring rain had passed over, and the sun shone wetly through tulip poplar and beech leaves. As the family rounded a curve, they spotted the form of a box turtle making its solemn way across the road. They stopped to pick it up, and it immediately withdrew inside its handsome shell. In a few minutes, the little boys were laughing loudly from the back seat as they watched it poke its head out of its shell and then its feet. As it got braver, it tried to push away from them, paddling the air with its stumpy feet. When they got home, little Eddie's dad got out his hand drill and carefully drilled a small hole through the lip of the turtle's shell, fastening a wire leader to it. "Does it hurt him?" asked little Eddie. "No more than it hurts you to clip your fingernails," said his dad. They carried the turtle to the grape trellis and tied him to a post with a 6-foot length of string. They set him down in the deep grass. "I'm going to name him Herbie," said little Eddie. "What does he eat?" Eddie's dad suggested he try to feed him peanut butter. So Eddie ran to the house to fetch a jar, and he came back panting. He unscrewed the lid and dipped his finger in. He came out with a long whip of peanut butter hanging from his finger. Holding the turtle up, he waved the peanut butter in front of his face. "Here, Herbie, Herbie, Herbie," said little Eddie. "Time for dinner." But Herbie didn't look especially interested. Eddie waved the peanut butter closer. Still, no action. At last, he put the peanut butter right up against Herbie's sharp little beak of a mouth. And that was the moment when little Eddie learned an important lesson. Herbie was a carnivore. That turtle snaked its wrinkly neck out, opened its mouth wide, and bit down hard on little Eddie's finger, clean up to the second joint. Little Eddie let out a shriek, and he began to swing his arm in a circle above his head. Herbie's little tail straightened out as he orbited Eddie's head, but he held on tight. Some people say a turtle won't let go until it thunders. Little Eddie was getting worried. Fortunately, his dad came to the rescue. He first grabbed little Eddie, then Herbie, and adopted the same technique he'd used on the rooster. Herbie began to loosen his grip. His eyes bugged out, and finally he let go. Eddie looked down at the bite mark on his finger. Then he used that finger to wipe his eye. "Happy birthday to me," he said, with a sniff. Well, when Eddie turned 7, he didn't ask for a box turtle safari. He wanted something different. He wanted to celebrate his birthday in a cave. As it happened, his daddy knew a farmer who owned a pasture with a cave in it. On May 27th, little Eddie, his family, and a couple of friends headed out to the country. They parked on a farm lane under a honey locust tree and held the barbed wire down for everyone to crawl through. Carefully dodging brown splats that dotted the pasture, they made their way to an upthrust of lichen-covered limestone. Rounding a boulder, they came to a mysterious opening in the side of the hill. A cool breeze flowed from the cave mouth, and on it was a humid, underground sort of smell. Holding hands, they cautiously entered the cave. Each step took them deeper into the darkness, but as they went, their eyes began to adjust. After a couple of minutes, little Eddie looked back to see a tiny spot of emerald green light at the cave mouth. He was mighty glad to be carrying a birthday present he'd opened earlier, a bright red plastic flashlight. Bit by bit they advanced over pebbles and rocks. They came to places where stalactites hung from the ceiling and water dripped into glassy pools. They reached a spot where everyone could sit down, and Eddie's mom produced a birthday cake. His dad lit the candles, and everyone turned off their flashlights. Eddie made a wish and blew out the candles. But suddenly, it was pitch dark. He couldn't see his hand, although it was right in front of his face. He was just starting to feel a little afraid when all of a sudden one of the candles burst back into flame, and then another and another. They were trick candles. Little Eddie laughed with relief, and he wasn't in any hurry to blow them out again. On the way out of the cave, little Eddie spotted something small and furry hanging from the passage wall. He walked closer to look at it, and at that moment it turned to look back at him. It was a little brown bat, one of the species that inhabited their area. That moment Eddie turned and said to his dad, "Remember when I blew out my candles? Guess what I wished for?" "What?" asked his dad. "A bat," said little Eddie, and broke into a grin that lit up the cave. Little Eddie's dad smiled back at him and produced an empty bread bag. He helped him gently slide it over the little brown bat. When little Eddie got home, he took his bat to the spare room. The only piece of furniture was a long table that sat right in the center of the room. Next he ran to his bedroom and grabbed a sleeping bag. "Come on, boys," he shouted. "Let's have some fun." They followed him to the spare room and crawled under the table. Then, before they let the bat loose, they climbed into the sleeping bag. Peeping out from a small hole, they watched little Eddie undo the twist tie on the bread bag and shake the bat out onto the floor. It sat bewildered for about 3 seconds, and then, with a series of high-pitched shrieks, it took to the air. "Where did it go?" asked Scotty. "Hang on, I'll check," said Eddie. He poked his head out of the sleeping bag. For a second, he saw nothing. The next thing he knew, the bat was zipping right past his face. He ducked back inside the sleeping bag. "Oh, it's out there all right. It's flying in loops under the table," he said with a shiver. The boys waited for a long time. "You think it's safe now?" asked Jimmy. "I'll see," said little Eddie. He cautiously poked his head out of the sleeping bag. Whoosh! The bat sailed right past his face. He screamed and jerked his head back inside the bag. "It's going around in circles," said little Eddie. "We're never going to get out of here." A few minutes later, the boy's dad heard an unusual racket coming from the spare room. When he went to investigate, he saw a wiggling sleeping bag under the table and a little brown bat flying in loops. He shook his head and smiled. Opening the door wide, he made the bat very happy, but not as happy as he made his 3 terrified sons.